Some intros. Let's start by the person with the longest beard.
Yeah, it was much longer until farm machinery got it.
Ontario is so exotic.
Hey, I could tell you stories. Have an hour. So, my name is Greenwood. 56 years ago, I created the Forgotten Realms. About it.
Actually, I go back to one heritage reserve. Yeah, okay.
About a decade later, a little under a decade later, along came D&D. And because this gentleman read my Dragon articles and wrote the white paper, a proposal for a unified game world for the second edition of the game.
That sounds like something I'd write.
Yeah, and his reward for that was, good, Jeff, find the game, find the settings, and call me. Yeah.
You call up Ed, see if he's willing to sell what he has.
And who are you, sir?
My name is Jeff Grubb. I am the poor schmuck who basically suggested bringing the realms into TSR and presenting it as a game world, a published game world. I always say that Ed is the architect of the realms. I'm just the engineer. So basically putting it all together, we wrote the gray box together, did a large number of products, including Cormier, a novel, as a tandem. And so we've been involved together for a lot of the early history of D&D. I also, pertinent to this discussion, wrote the Forgotten Realms comic book for DC. That probably will come up as well.
Yes. I'm James Lowder. I was part of the Forgotten Realms team in the book department. I was the series editor for Realms, Ravenloft, Dark Sun, various projects. I wrote novels. As far as the discussion of comics go, I got the opportunity. I was on the approval team in TSR for the comics for the Forgotten Realms and AD&D comics, and the initial Spelljammer material, and the 3 Avatar comics adaptations that DC did. I wrote a realm story for the TSR World's Annual. Fast forward a number of years later, I was the editor for the Worlds of Dungeons and Dragons comic book for Devil's Due, which actually started, and we can talk about how I got involved with that. It also involved me being a writer for them. And I am a full-time freelance writer, editor, working in comics, fiction, and gaming.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I would suggest we start chronologically, and unless I'm mistaken, thank you so much. That means that we are starting with DC Comics. And
No.
We are
not.
No, we are not.
The first D&D comics were one page, and it's what you're thinking of.
Yep.
One page adverts done by Steve Sullivan and Bill Willingham,
Right.
that were put into DC and Marvel comic books way before we got involved in DC.
And they were actually, it was a serial.
Yes.
I mean, it carried on between stories, and it was the way a lot of comic book readers were introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. They saw that narrative.
They saw the narrative, and that became... Now, the interesting thing, I think I forgot from Steve, was, of course, they couldn't actually show combat.
Right.
So every episode was, wow, it's really great. We escaped those ogre magi.
Right.
And then they have some trap they get around. They say, oh, look, there's some green slime. Continued next month. So, but those were the first comics,
Right.
as far as what we were doing. And, of course, we had Dragon Magazine.
And that was the other one with Wormy and other individual comics that ran in
Phineas Fingers.
Phineas Fingers was the original one with a continuing story fighting the Halflings Thieves Guild, all the way through. And so we had Dragon Mirth, I think they called it that operation. So we've had a number of comics that came through on Dragon Magazine, and they were the insert. They were the.
And so those are the -1 because they weren't actually licensed D&D comics directly. They were the ads, or they were comics related to D&D. And then even before the DC, there's another step before that.
Yeah.
Where TSR can't get, and Jeff can speak to this, TSR can't get a license with DC and Marvel, so they do some of the things themselves. So the initial Dragonlance graphic novels.
The Dragonlance graphic novels did predate
For the DC
license.
So
and
the
help-
first
and
three.
help to prepare the ground.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because we could do things, we could do something at that print level.
Yep.
We had the art talent. We had
Jeff
the ability
Butler
to produce
did.
it. Jeff Butler worked on
Yep.
one of them. So basically, we had those going, and I think that attracted the attention of Mike Gold
Yep.
at DC Comics, and Mike was in charge of new lines, new products they were looking to expand out. They were doing a Flash Gordon book, and I don't know who made the initial contact,
Right.
but they were coming out to TSR to to talk to us, to
Right.
see the area. We were going to pitch and we were going to talk about it, and they happened to arrive on Hack Day.
What's Hat Day, Jeff?
Hack Day was a day where we were all supposed to be wearing silly hats, sillier than we normally wear. So
The atmosphere of professionalism was palpable.
Yes.
we were legendary for the idea of basically choosing the worst possible moments to act childish. So we were there in the hats, and they're talking about how they can do it and how it can work out.
Yep.
And we pitched a variety of ideas, and they settled on a Dragonlance book. They settled on an AD&D book that was set in the realms,
Right.
and they were set on Gamma Rotters.
Yes.
Gamma Rotters?
Oh, yeah.
Gamma Rotters was a board game created by Zeb Cook with giant kaiju. So huge
One of which is a
hamsters.
penguin.
I named the penguin.
There we go.
So I did the world building
It
on
was
that.
not.
Very nice.
And
A
it's the-
moon penguin.
and it's
See,
the- it's
I'm
the-
a huge fan of the Gamma Rider stuff.
The
So,
Gamma Rotters, the thing was basically you had your big kaiju, because Zeb is a big kaiju fan.
Yes.
Okay. He's
His
also a fan
office
of
at
big
TSR was full of
filled
Godzilla
with
toys.
Godzilla toys, and this was in the 80s before it got really hot.
Yeah, we used to drive to Johann Plaza in Chicago and do road trips every couple of months to go buy more Godzilla toys.
Yes, we had an inflatable Godzilla in one of
Right.
the cubes for a while. It was but and the rest of it was popcorn, which were the little tanks and everything that basically were going to get mushed up. So they came up with a story for that, and came up with a pitch. Michael Fleischer, who was legendary for his work on Spectre
Yes,
back in the 60s, 70s,
and Jonah Hex.
just was the first writer on the book. So they helped set up the characters. We had a centaur, we had the dwarf, we had the alcoholic paladin, we had Kira, who was a spellcaster with a dark past.
Right.
And basically and Vajra. Vajra was our woman warrior.
Right.
And he did the first 4, and then he left the project.
So Dan Mishkin.
Dan Mishkin did the next 4.
Yep.
And he would come back at 9 and run the rest of the
Right.
realm.
Yep.
But 9 through 12 was mine.
Right.
That was my audition. I had the chance to pitch a set of comic books that basically involved the dwarf and the centaur fighting against the Thieves Guild run by Xanathar, the Beholder. And I figured, okay, Xanathar, we'll bump him off. We're done. And they decided, no, we're going to bring him back and make Xanathar a position. Okay, so if you're a Beholder in Waterdeep, you get a chance of being Xanathar. Everybody gets a chance.
Right.
And that became the audition we had for what became the Forgotten Realms book.
Right.
And the Forgotten Realms book, the Michigan didn't want the Paladin, so I picked him up and created a new cast. And we basically, since the AD&D book was in Waterdeep, we had a teleporting ship that would go all over the realms, and we would meet Alias, and we would meet Elminster.
Yep.
And when we did 3rd edition, we would basically, have a big event in there. So it was a lot of fun. It worked out well for DC because I would write up a script and I would show it to Jim Ward, our boss, before I sent it to them.
Right.
So the stuff would come pre-approved, and they would be happy about it.
Yep.
And otherwise they would often come back with, and we'd have comments and to get a little bit.
Well, yeah, and part of it was the comic writers didn't know anything about the game and had limited knowledge of the worlds.
Right.
So they would come back and pitch stuff that worked as comic book stories, but weren't necessarily good licensed comic book stories. And that's really common when you're dealing with, cross media things with licenses.
I did deal with one writer who said, count the number of damn toes on the dragon.
Right.
Right.
And that was initially how, with the DC books, how I got involved, because I was doing approvals for, like I said, AD&D and then Jeff's stuff.
Yeah.
when you got those to Ward, it was Ward, and then I would see it if Jim said okay. And because Jeff knew this material, it was the easiest approvals ever.
Right, because I knew where the bodies were buried.
Exactly, yeah.
We for the Forgotten Realms book, we had a new artist. His name was Rags Morales, who's an absolutely fantastic artist, and this was his first big job. And I'm just so happy to have been working with him all the way through.
Right.
So we were very fortunate in that direction. I think Jan Dersima did a lot of the art for the AD&D book, and I
was
can't tell you
fantastic
who
too.
did the Gamma
Dragonlance book, Ty Templeton, Gamma Marauders, maybe. The Dragonlance book had more rotating people in it. Barb Kessel did some of the writing for that, and for Spelljammer too.
Yes,
and she did the adaptations of Avatar. And we were working with Kim Yale and then Elliot Magin.
Elliot Magin, who was a writer of Superman back in the Julius Schwartz
Shazam
years.
In the 70s. Elliot did.
He didn't win on Jeopardy.
No, he didn't win.
No.
He went on Jeopardy.
Yeah, he went on Jeopardy.
But, he also did Miracle Monday, which is a
Superman novel.
A well-regarded Superman
highly regarded.
novel.
Yeah, and both Kim and Elliot were fantastic to work with.
They were good editors.
They were really good editors.
So we had really, really good, response. We did a Spelljammer line. We did Forgotten Realms. We did a Spelljammer line,
and that was introduced with the TSR World's Annual, which was a one-shot that included a continuing story that then stopped in each one of the other books that were happening. Jeff was on other deadlines and couldn't write the Forgotten Realms part of that, which was my audition. For the series.
And I know Kate wrote
Kate wrote the Dragonlance or the AD&D part.
The AD&D one.
Yeah.
So my wife did that.
Yes, because I got to work with Rags on the TSR World's Annual part. And then
we took a character that we had introduced in one set of stories in the Forgotten Realms, and then spun that character off into Spelljammer. So you see a motif, sort of, and it fits in nicely with the realms as being an ever-growing and interlocking type of domain.
And so then that spun off into Spelljammer, and the idea was at that point that eventually there were going to be more books because DC was extremely happy with the sale.
We were outselling. We were like in the top hundreds of the capital city list, which was literally that's
like
about where
selling around Wonder Woman,
Captain America, basically the mid list Marvel books. So we actually everything was X-Men and Batman, but once you get down there, we were doing quite well.
And they were consistently well received. The people working on them were happy because the people in house doing the approvals. Especially Jeff and me, we knew comics well, and we were looking for ways to make these approvals work for the creators. In addition,
I had the opportunity to work with on Marvel Superheroes, the first role-playing game that was done. So I basically had talked to a lot of people at Marvel and basically was paying a lot of attention to how comic books are put together from a standpoint of how are we going to do this for how we do our games in comic books as opposed to doing comic books to games.
And so there were plans at that point. After I had done my audition, I was going to write the Ravenloft comic book, the continuing Ravenloft comic book, for which I put together the pitch for the first 12 issues, and Elliot Magin and I were talking about potential artists at that point. And we were looking at that being kind of a leaning toward what DC was doing at Vertigo at that point. So one of the artist names, Chris Pachalo, came up as a potential artist. He was doing Shade the Changing Man at the time for that. And that was the direction we were leaning with what would have been the Ravenloft continuing series. And the other there were 4 additional books, and that'll tell you how happy they were.
Yes.
So we already had Gamma Marauders lasted 12 issues. They didn't continue it after that, but they wrapped it up. but we had AD&D, Forgotten Realms, Dragonlance, Spelljammer, all were running, and they were really happy, and they were going to add 4 more.
Yeah.
So it would have been Ravenloft, Greyhawk, Dark Sun, and for the life of me, I can't remember the other one.
Well, one of the challenges when we get into the dark period here,
Right.
Was Buck Rogers.
And so I was teeing this up.
Okay, and it's because I must deliver sadness and sad news on how things work. The owners of the company control the Buck Rogers license. We've done a number of Buck Rogers games over the years. We really wanted to do they really wanted a Buck Rogers comic. And Mike Gold sort of soft pedaled it for quite some time.
We'll think about it. We need the opening.
We need to concentrate on concentrate on what we're doing well, that sort of thing. So TSR formed its second West Coast company. The first one was with Gary and out at King Vidar's mansion, etc. The second one was
TSR West.
Flint Dilley, who did a lot of good stuff with Transformers. And they were going to basically set up their own comics, and if DC wasn't going to do
Buck Rogers,
we'll do Buck Rogers.
How did Flint have that much sway at TSR, Jeff?
Well, Flint is one of the owners of the Buck Rogers license, and also the brother of Lorraine Williams,
what?
who's the president.
And so the license with DC was exclusive, and so to get around, they thought what this was going to be, we'll call these comic modules
and put game material in it.
And there will be a game in the back. And that's totally not the same as a comic book because it's got games in the back.
And this is not unusual. TSR has had previous, before even, Lorraine was our boss, gone into competition with its own licensors.
Right.
They had the LJN figures,
right?
Strong Arm and everything, and they decided to. This is when I was coming on board in '82. They were going to do their own figures, but they weren't going to have movable joints. So they were big chunks of plastic. We referred to them as inaction figures. and they're not bad, but they just
In the original contracts that I signed with TSR,
yes,
the Knights of Mistranner players were all due to get the first finished, approved, didn't have to be the prototype. It didn't have to be number one. But from the first one, they were all supposed to get figurines. That was in the contracts. Yeah. And Florence was supposed to be bendable and anatomically correct.
Huh?
Okay.
And guess what? They don't read their contracts.
They don't read no, they don't. I noticed that.
I'm sorry, but Jim, I'm confused. You said that there were games in the back of the comics produced by TSR West.
Right.
How would you play the game in the comic book?
Yeah, they didn't think any of this through. And it wasn't like the staff, Scott Herring, who had been a game designer at TSR Central, went to the West Coast, and they hired, so to their credit, they hired really good writers to do these. Stephen Grant and did Gerber write something for them?
I think they did. They had good artists as well.
Yeah, and they had good artists.
Flint had the Rolodex. He worked with a lot of these people on animated projects.
Exactly.
So this was a great opportunity.
Can I drop a name?
Go drop a name.
He will loudly and frequently proclaim that Frank Miller's his best friend.
Right. Yes.
And that Dilios in 300 is based on him.
Yeah, and there is
Flint in G.I. Joe is based on him.
Flint and Dragonlance is not. And there's one of those quick shots of potential RoboCops, and one of them is listed as Flint Dillon.
Yeah,
the picture's a woman, but basically it's
a name check for
Flint. So they're definitely
so they had talent.
Yeah,
but to play the games, they're in the back of a comic book.
You have to destroy.
The comic.
What?
Yeah. So they didn't think this through for the market they were selling these to, and the idea was, they literally said, "Well, that means they'll just buy 2."
Yeah. And from your book, basically, I had a quote I didn't know from Flint, the idea that we were going to go for the direct sale book market, the Barnes and Nobles, the Borders, as opposed to the comic book market, which it wasn't a primary goal. So the sales came out, and they were very, very
they didn't sell well at all. So, and this actually, the idea of doing games in the comics was in and of itself not a bad idea. I actually, and Jeff knows this, it took me quite a long time to convince DC to let me write text pages, including character stats,
Right.
in the AD&D comic. It took, more than a year. I tried to get. No, actually, we want this because then people will read the game stats and be curious about the game, or the game players will be more likely to buy the comics if we're giving them game content.
And it occupies a page
Right.
in the in the book,
Right.
Because basically, if they can't sell all the stuff, they're putting house ads.
Right, and it used to be the old comics in the 40s, 30s, and 40s would have a prose story in them,
Right.
because that was a way to foil the postal rates.
Postal rates it now, but it's not a comic book.
And
it's
It's a magazine.
Again,
It's not a comic book, which is why there's prose stories
You find
in all of those golden.
the Casper the Friendly Ghost stuff. I read
Yeah.
those when I was a kid.
Right. Yeah. So it wasn't unusual, and even TSR had at one point talked about in the book department in '87 they were going to do a Time Life book series on World War II, the 50th anniversary of World War II, that was going to have war games in the back.
Yeah.
Which actually was a great idea. That was Gene Black tried to sell that. So the idea for doing this for the comics in and of itself isn't the problem. It's
Right.
the execution.
But it created a divide between DC and TSR because DC looked at it and said, "Okay, you're going to go off and do your own stuff. You're going to compete with us."
Yeah.
Now, the bad news is one thing that they had. The deal was if DC refused to do a particular line,
Right.
they basically would then go and be able to be done at TSR West.
Right.
And so that they refused Buck Rogers. We're going to do Buck Rogers. So one of the reasons they kept Ravenloft in turnaround, because if they said no,
There's seats up here if you need seats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't be shy.
if they said no, the DC West crew could have taken that.
Well, initially, because the conversation actually got to the point where we were looking at artist work,
Yeah.
because they were serious about it going forward, and then all of a sudden, everything with the comic books with DC seizes up.
Yep.
And Jeff comes down to tell me we've got to wrap up all these series. So when you're doing the approvals, everything's got to pull together on all of these things.
Also, Lorraine found out that I was writing comic books
Right,
on
yes.
the side. I was on like I had written like
24 issues. Yeah,
Well,
2
no,
years worth of
a year's worth of it done, and basically she turned to Mike Cook, who was our vice president, and said, "Tell him he can't do that anymore."
right.
And Mike Cook, was a wonderful human being, came up to me and said, "Jeff, in 3 days I'm going to come up to this office and I'm going to tell you can't write any more comic books. So any contracts that you have in place before then, you'll have to honor. But after that, no more comic books." So I contacted DC, and then basically they sent me 8 contracts, and I filled them all out, and I sent them back real fast. And so basically, I got to finish the arcs that we were writing, including a fill-in issue that we had done, just because we had already put that in place. And Mike Cook was not under any obligation to tell me that in advance. Of course, Mike knew what I was doing, and when Lorraine came to him, his reaction was one of, "I'm shocked.
I'm
simply
shocked there's gambling going on in this establishment."
I had no idea that this was happening. I'll take care of it right away."
And if you haven't, IDW reprinted a lot of these books, including all the run of Jeff's issue. The fill-in issue is lovely, and actually one of my favorite things from that era of TSR, because it's called "Everybody Wants to Rule the Realms."
Yeah.
And it's a fourth wall breaking tour of the Forgotten Realms, which is really actually a tour in large part of TSR's offices.
So there's a lot of us who all have cameos, and Jim and I are a big pass a room, and Elminster is there explaining the difference of Mulholland
Moharandi pottery
from different eras.
And there's a stack of cassette tapes.
Go, hang on, we've run out of tape again.
Again, Elminster.
And they censored 2 parts, only 2 things out of that entire issue. We had a big door with boards across the front that said 9 hells do not enter ever, because we were in that era when we were not talking about
demons and devils anymore.
And there was a Tinder in the foreground.
Oh, there we go.
Basically, he's like, "Tracy, Margaret? Anybody? Because they were on the outs with Tracy again. So
yeah.
Kim Yale was in it. All our artists were in it. Jim Ward was in it. Kim Mohan was in it. Rags was in it.
Yep.
So
nobody knew.
who
Jeff
we
just
are.
came around with a camera one day and took a picture of me in my office and said, "Don't worry about it," and left.
Which probably was not the smartest thing, given the fact that people might have umbrance about, but no one was worried about it.
Oh, it was charming. I mean, it was such a good issue.
It was done with love.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. So that blows up the DC relationship.
We're done, and the West Coast operation had stolen Elliot Maggin as an editor from DC, because he was moved out to the West Coast, and he was basically going to run it. And when I heard that the West Coast operation was going to be shut down, I called up Elliot and I said, "Elliot, have you heard anything about the health of the company? Are there any rumors about what's happening?" No, everything's fine. Oh, Pete Renner's here. I'll call you back after I'm done.
Who was the operations manager at the main company? It's sort of like, don't mind me, the headsman is here.
Yeah, exactly. It's just and then after that, it was all gone.
So that implodes. And then the next thing that happens is TSR goes back to hey, we'll try and publish these things ourselves.
Yes.
And they do Grand Tour of the Realms and a couple of other one-shots.
And those one-shots are primarily promotional in nature.
Exactly.
So they're coming out of the marketing area. And the Grand Tour of the Realms is basically what we're doing next year, all for the Realms. And the framing story was taking the D&D kids as older, and Presto is trying to become Elminster's assistant.
And I star again.
Yes.
Julia Martin and I are starring at the beginning of the comic book. So I am the only Canadian to have appeared as himself in the pages of comics from two different comic book companies, which occasionally gets me in the door at small conventions.
Ooh, okay. They've got a low bar.
That's it. And I am the limbo dancer.
But yes, we did some promotional stuff.
So they do those.
We did one for Dragon Strike.
Yep.
Yeah. So I wrote that one.
Yep.
But they were like one-shots, onesie-twosie things.
And then
I want to ask a question. So how was the Dragon Strike comic book distributed? Did that go into comic stores? Or
that went into comic stores.
Okay.
So it was primarily
wrapped it around a stone.
Jeff's writing is worth more than that.
It was a Marvel comic.
Yep.
So it basically went out with the regular Marvel shipment.
Okay.
Now, one of the joys, by the way, of working with Marvel and DC, Marvel on RPGs and DC on comics, is we would get free comics.
Oh, yes.
And so the big packet of that week's comics would show up, and I'd put it in a big manila envelope and with a name check on it.
And they had we had a routing list.
We had a routing list for most magazines that we subscribed to.
It was great.
People would have these piles of comic books in their office.
Stephen Shand, please read last week's comics. I'm waiting for them.
Yes.
And upon the occasion after Gen Con, the Gen Con upon which officially Wizards and TSR had merged, I did not know, staff members did, that nobody was coming back to the building.
Oh, right.
So I did my usual, which I was doing for Canadian customs reasons, 10 days rather than, and going there beginning, going there back. So I came to the building and it was all locked up and there was nobody there. Well, that building is not secure. All you do is climb up on the loading dock, which has dirty plastic sheets to keep the rain out, and you're in the building.
Okay.
So I'm walking through the building, and the lights are automatically coming on wherever I'm walking. And I go to cubicle land. It's deserted, and it's dark. Well, there's one light on. And I go to it, because I know what it is. It's Steve Shen's cubicle. Why is the light on? I go into his cubicle, and sitting on his chair is his comic book package. And I know that Jeff's packing, and right next door, Steve is packing. So I drive to the corner of Clover and Pleasant.
Yes.
And I knock on Steve's door.
I didn't leave that with that group. So
yeah. Okay. But I mean, there was nobody there.
Yeah.
So I walk in, and Steve is surrounded by boxes to the ceiling, looking sort of stunned because he's been doing it and his mind has turned to tapioca after 8 hours. And I said, I got your comic books. And he goes, oh, thanks, man. I would never have gotten those. And throws them in a box, tapes it up. And
So after the end of TSR, Wizards gets the property. Eventually, Devil's Due does licenses for direct adaptations. These aren't new. The DC comics are all original stories, except for the adaptations of Avatar, the 3 Avatar novels. Devil's Due is doing adaptations. They're not doing new stories.
They're taking a short story and basically, doing.
Well, originally it was the Dragonlance series and the Salvatore Grist books, so Homeland and things like that. And IDW has reprinted some of these as well. And they were thinking they were going to do an anthology title called Worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, which I had actually proposed at one point as an anthology title for fiction anthology that would have been Cross Worlds at TSR when I was in the book department. And I knew Tim Seeley, who was doing some of the writing and some of the art for the books. And he got me in touch with the publisher because they were interested in adapting my Ravenloft short story as one of the stories that they were going to do in Worlds of Dungeons and Dragons. They started looking at the rest of them, and then they discovered that I had edited the anthologies that about half of these stories appeared in. So they then brought me in as a co-editor with Mike O'Sullivan of the book, and I was doing all of the coordination with the authors, because one of the things that I tried to do when we write stories for these shared worlds, we don't necessarily get royalties for everything that gets adapted from them. The comic books, we don't. However, if you hire the original author to write the script of the comic book, they get paid by the comic book company to write the adaptation of their own stuff. And so I did that in as many cases as people who were interested in doing it. And actually, I got to work with Ed and Jeff again because we did an adaptation of Elminster at the Mage Fair, which was a short story I edited originally for one of the Realms anthologies.
You got paid for that?
You did get paid for it.
No, I'm saying you got paid for that?
They owe me money.
Okay. I
made sure.
And sympathize.
I made sure. Yeah. I mean, this is so. In the end, Devil's Due lost the licenses and went belly up as a company. But these books did really well.
And I have a story there on Elminster and the Mage Fair.
Yeah.
Because when you do an adaptation, it's not a boom, 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 boom type of basically copying it over and telling what the art things are. It was a 2-issue.
Right. We split the story over 2 issues.
So you have to have rising action toward the middle, and then a hook and basically a recapitulation of the story for the next one in case people had missed it. And so I looked at it and I called up Ed because I'm allowed to. Because I do it.
Right.
So I'm not allowed to.
Well, and Jeff got the assignment because I asked Ed initially if he wanted to do the adaptation, and he was busy on something else. And I said, okay, well, who would you suggest? And of course.
Okay. Well, I did that, and I made some changes.
Yep.
And I got a feedback from Watsy, and I don't know if it was from you or from
it was from me.
How dare you change Ed's story?
Because the approval process at Hasbro Wizards of the Coast at that time, maybe it's different now, was one of those big doors with 9th circle of hell, don't go down here. They had 14 different people in the approval process from a Hasbro VP down to somebody at Wizards of the Coast. Okay. And the Wizards of the Coast people are saying, this line isn't in the original story, so please don't add it.
Yeah.
And the Hasbro VP, which literally I got on one of the Dragonlance stories we adapted, I don't like the ending, and can we change the title?
About your underwater barbecue.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so as licensees, we were supposed to address all of those comments and get them approved. And they actually retroactively took away approval of Elminster at the Mage Fair. Yeah. After they had approved the script, we got it all drawn.
Yes.
And then Hasbro went in and retroactively said, no, we don't approve this. I'm super proud of this. I shouldn't be. I got kicked out of the Hasbro approval system at 9:00 on a Sunday morning.
Wow.
Before the internet, somebody had to drive into the offices in Pawtucket, Rhode Island at Hasbro and lock me out because I went back in and found all of the old approvals.
Yeah, and
then screen capped them and sent them to them and said, "You've already approved this." And so
I did not know this because from my standpoint, that basically the feedback I got is, you've messed with it.
How dare you follow
Right.
your own
And
rules?
that's what, yes. And the feedback, yeah, go
And
ahead.
then when I said, well, I talked with Ed about it, we
Right.
worked through it, and the very next email I got was, "How dare you go behind our backs and talk to Ed?"
Right. Because what happened was Hasbro got angry about the fact that this was everything that we were doing, because one of the objections they raised after I said, "Well, you approved this," was, "Well, Ed may not like it." And
Yes.
I got to say, no. Ed is very happy with this. We've coordinated all of this all the time. And then I stopped getting emails from them too.
And of course, I wrote no more stories for Devil's Due.
Right, yeah. I mean,
and if they were still a going concern, I'd feel.
Oh, they are not. All of the writers that I invited got paid.
Yes.
Including Lynn Cunningham, who actually I paid out of my pocket when they didn't pay her. So the Devil's Due books though were really quite good. They're very solid adaptations.
Yes.
The Raphael Kianan artwork for the Driss story he did for Worlds of Dungeons and Dragons is amazing. And the adaptation of Elminster at the Mage Fair is lovely.
Yes,
It's a great adaptation of that story. So we did really good work. We won an Origins Award for best game related book for the.
Really?
Yeah, we did.
I know for Elminster.
It was for the second trade paperback, which I'll check to see if Elminster is in there, so you can put it on the resume.
Yeah. Okay.
But that went belly up. And so comics again for Dungeons & Dragons went into hiatus until IDW came along. And that's Jim Zub would have been here if he didn't have COVID.
Yeah.
But IDW then got the license.
And you were working with the IDW?
I did an IDW series before they brought Jim Zub on.
Right, yeah. And they did a number of different books. They've done Ravenloft. They've done most of the books have been Realms. And those have been very successful, and they've been originals.
Mm-hmm.
And did I just see something that Dark Horse?
Correct. So IDW lost the license. They're not doing them anymore. And Wizards of the Coast and Dark Horse Comics announced at Comic-Con last week that Dark Horse Comics now has the license. And they will be doing new books. And what these will be, no one knows. We're this early. That was just announced last week. That they'll be doing new comics and possibly some art books.
So, given your history, are you involved in this?
I'm not, but I might be.
I wish you luck and remember us.
I will, absolutely. I always remember you.
We live right over here.
Yeah. And so that takes us to right now, last week.
That's the history of D&D and comics.
Well done. We have a few moments for questions.
Yes,
Sir.
Preacher.
Of all the comic modules TSR produced, are there any you think deserve a second look?
I feel like I probably have read more of them than anyone
You
else.
probably have read, we got copies of them. So
Yes.
yeah.
So I'm going to say the best one was Warhawks.
I think that was the Stephen Grant one.
I think, yeah, it was. That was the Stephen Grant one. It was Chasing Nazis Through Time is the short pitch on it. I'm going to say that, there was the horror comic, R.I.P.
R.I.P. Oh, gosh.
That was going to be their edgy, that was going to be a role-playing game at one point, too. Their edgy horror thing.
They did a sizzle reel.
And I saw a pencil sketch for a possible cover for RIP with the whole family in formal duds standing around an open grave. Yeah. And I could recognize TSR employees caricatured as the family members. There were no labels on it. I just went, I wonder how that'll fly.
The worst one I would say was called Intruder. It was essentially Quantum Leap with bad art. Other questions?
Wow, that's a great pitch.
Yeah.
Quantum Leap with bad art.
I mean, it was a few years before Quantum Leap. I'm surprised someone didn't sue.
Yeah,
go for it.
Must own runs on any of the comics you guys oversaw? Like for people
the
new?
Forgotten Realms series.
Yes,
Yeah,
Far One and
Absolutely.
24
The
was
DC Forgotten Realms series.
Yeah.
And it's still, I've actually read it when IDW did the reprints. I read it again.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it stands up
And then
really
there are
well.
standout issues like Head Chiefs.
Head Chief.
Yes,
That's
Head
a
Cheese is
standard
a big
issue.
Have we talked about Head Chiefs?
No, we didn't. Most of the stories I wrote were 4 issues because they would collapse nicely into a collection if they ever decided to do it. But one of them was in the realms, halflings have an addiction to cheese.
Cheese.
And this was literally, this was interesting in the fact that originally the concept was it would also take place inside Foxhole Card Luck's mind while he's on a drug bender.
Right.
So basically, because Rags was getting behind, so we would basically do something with a lot of black backgrounds.
And that's the artist Rags Morales.
Rags
right?
Morales. And of course, Rags came up with all this beautiful art.
Oh,
What's
that
going-
spinning.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And
Yeah,
of course, so
great.
it completely negated it. But the thing is, Jim Ward loved that story. And after he got the pencils for approval, he basically made copies of all 24 pages and hung them around his office. And so, basically to other people doing it. I thought that was, that's nice. That was a favorite story as a result.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we really did a lot of good characters. We did a lot of good stories, and in the 24, and I think it really holds up.
Yeah. And when they visited Shadowdale, I was seeing depictions of Leo,
Yeah,
War Inspector Leo.
yeah. War Inspector Leo.
And,
Oh, yes. Right.
and Elminster and so on, that didn't jive with my original headcanon before
Right.
TSR's involved. But I liked them so much. It's like, so that's when you've succeeded. When I'm going, hey, these are better.
Yeah. Your original Leo was a little problematic. So
What's wrong with it?
We can save that for the
exactly. But yeah,
fiction run.
in redefining Leo,
Yeah.
I inadvertently made him War Inspector, and I didn't realize that.
War
Oh
Inspector,
my
the
God.
video game
Yeah.
designer, worked at
He was one of our
Steve
bosses.
Jackson Games,
Yeah.
and then was Jim Ward's assistant,
Right.
kind of in the game department for a couple of years.
Yeah, and basically the way we depicted Leo,
It looks just
it
like
looks a lot like him, and I'm just, oh boy. I made Leo a neurotic New Yorker. So
Weighing back.
Jeff, I really enjoyed the short stories that followed up on the comics and Dragons.
oh yes,
Did you have any plans to do like a novel of those characters?
no, because there's no opportunity right now within novels right now.
No, well, I know that now.
Yeah.
Did you have the time where you think?
No. I was using them for short stories because we had done our run, we were finished, and okay, I've got a few more stories to tell. Let's tell them here. And basically, if the opportunity presents it, I'll take them apart and say, is there something we can do? But at the moment, I've got no plans for the team.
Sir.
Were there ever any comic book story pitches that got presented but never got the green light that y'all ever wanted to try to have done, but just never?
That's a Jim story, I feel.
Well, I pitched 12 issues of a Ravenloft comic and created new characters and a new domain, and had that plotted out to the point where I was just getting ready to start the script for the first issue when everything blew up.
Yeah.
So I actually still have that pitch in my files. I haven't looked at it in a very long time, but
Just put it in AI.
no one will see Ben for the rest of the convention. So yeah, I mean, in terms of the individual issues for that stuff, well, there were, and for the Devil's Due stuff, there was Pat Elrod was writing an adaptation of one of her Strahd stories, and the cover for that book got done, and it's gorgeous. It's Strahd standing over a map of Barovia, I might have posted the art on Facebook at one point. I got permission from the artist to do it. And so I had for Worlds of Dungeons and Dragons, I had another 4 issues plotted out for which ones we were going to do. And we had an Eberron story that we were working on. We had that Strahd story. And those, I'm sad, didn't go forward. But the art for that Strahd cover was the only one that got finished that I wish got published because it's great.
So Monty Cook mentioned something similar to what you're talking about, there being 14 people approving everything.
You're right.
What was the genesis of that?
Well, because different people at Hasbro and Wizards feel like they need to get their voice in the conversation to justify their job. I don't know.
There wasn't all at once. There wasn't like
no, it was a checklist, and so people had a certain amount of time to chime in. So you would post, say it's a cover, you post the cover sketch up, and you have to do this and this is typical for licenses. I've done all kinds of licensing stuff and written contracts for licenses. So at this stage, we get to look at the description of what the cover will be, and everybody signs off on it. And then we see a sketch, and everybody signs off on it. And they have a window of like 15 or 30 days, and everybody signs off on it. And then you move to the next one, and it gets colored and that sort of thing. But what was happening with the Hasbro was they would approve stuff and then circle back and say, now we're removing these approvals. And they had different agendas, right? When we were doing these things for fiction or games in-house at TSR, including the approvals we were giving DC Comics.
Yeah.
Multiple people would say, Harold Johnson was reviewing the Dragonlance stuff, but he would also occasionally look at the AD&D things and come to me and say, hey, did you notice on page 52 the dragon has too many toes?
Right.
And then we would unify all of those into a single set of corrections. And if I didn't agree with Harold, I would work it out with him. And then we would come up with one set. So DC got one set of comments from us, and it was unified. They never saw any of the family squabbling going on.
We saw one voice.
With one voice from us, which made it really easy for them. That was not the process with Hasbro in the 2000s. It might be different now.
This is something that swings back and forth because we've had cases where the approval process is one guy who's overloaded and can't get anything done, and then we have the ones where everybody's involved, and so we have everybody chiming in.
Right. Sir.
Just to follow up on that anecdote, did you ever find that in that 14th level thing that it was internal politics where it was
absolutely.
a certain specific person that was like,
sure,
I don't like.
Sure, yeah, sure. Somebody would say something and somebody would react to it and ask for the opposite. Yeah, and that's the family squabbling that somebody as a licensee shouldn't see.
Right.
And I'm hoping with Hasbro and Wizards that they've improved that. And I know from Bob Salvatore with the novels that he's been doing that he hasn't run into that kind of problem. So,
but Margaret and Tracy did.
But Margaret and Tracy did, and actually caused a lawsuit.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's exactly how that happened. Sir.
I was going to say, Jeff, that I still have my AD&D comic books I bought back in the late 80s, 89. My son and I, a few years ago, we went through every comic book I owned and we cataloged.
Okay.
So we were talking about just double checking. I know I have AD&D comic books, but yeah, the original AD&D run. So now I want to go back and pull it out and reread those.
You got 9 through 12, and I think I did the annual because that was a crossover between the AD&D and Forgotten Realms.
Yep. Yeah, not the annual.
So, yeah. Gil Kane did the cover.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, pretty awesome. Okay.
Okay.
We are
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good time. That's going on the internet. We're going to get in trouble. That's going on the